WNYC Studios.
During the election season, our colleagues in the WNYC newsroom produced a great podcast called The United States of Anxiety, trying to gauge and explain the rising tension at both sides of the political spectrum. They have a new season beginning today, and we liked the first episode so much we're featuring it here as a podcast extra. Here's how they describe the upcoming season. Donald Trump understands something very important about American democracy. If you want to control the debate over policy, you first gotta conquer our political culture, our values, our norms, shared assumptions, what we feel and believe about ourselves. But the battle to capture America's political culture has a long history on race and gender, science and religion, matters of sex and media and war and peace, all of it. There's a backstory.
We left you on November 10th, 2016, what feels like eons ago.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
He won all of it.
This is not a Muslim ban. It's not a travel ban.
Our press secretary gave alternative facts to that.
For the first time ever, the Dow Jones closed above 20,000 points.
Donald Trump has now been president for 100 nerve-wracking days, so we are back to take stock. I'm Kai Wright, and from WNYC Studios, this is round 2 of the United States of Anxiety. The Culture Wars. For the next several weeks, we're not going to talk at all here about the grind of daily controversies that have filled the past 4 months. If you're like me, you're already reaching exhaustion on that front. We actually won't even talk much about Donald Trump. Rather, we want to discuss something Trump seems to understand about American politics. Or maybe it's even broader than American politics. Maybe it's humanity overall. He gets this one important thing about us. And the best way I can explain that thing is this iconic scene from The Devil Wears Prada.
Oh, okay. I see. You think this has nothing to do with you.
It's the one where Miranda Priestley, Meryl Streep's character, of course, is annoyed with her new assistant, Andy, who thinks she's too good for fashion. Miranda schools her.
You go to your closet and you select, I don't know, that lumpy blue sweater, for instance, because...
She tells Andy the story behind the sweater. In fact, the sweater isn't even blue. It's cerulean. And a whole bunch of stuff happened in order to make cerulean a popular color.
In 2002, Oscar de la Renta did a collection of cerulean gowns. And then I think it was Yves Saint Laurent, wasn't it, who showed cerulean military jackets? I think we need a jacket.
And all of those collective design choices gradually shaped the mass market, with the help of Miranda Priestley's careful curation, of course. All of which set Andy up to pick out her lumpy blue sweater.
And it's sort of comical how you think that you've made a choice that exempts you from the fashion industry when, in fact, you're wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room.
So what's fashion and The Devil Wears Prada got to do with Donald Trump and American politics? Well, stay with me for a minute. I think 2 things. Number 1, culture doesn't just happen. People create it. Sometimes it's created by multi-million-dollar industries and high-end tastemakers. Sometimes it's pushed from the bottom up by countercultural movements or even a lone determined voice. But it starts somewhere. Number 2, politics is a lot like Andy's lumpy blue sweater. Before masses of people rally behind a particular idea, like, say, a border wall or a travel ban, somebody has to work that idea into our culture, make it a widespread norm. And this is what Donald Trump understands. He's been picking through America's grievances and frustrations and building them into a culture war. Rally by rally, tweet by tweet.
We're going to win so much, you may even get tired of winning. And you'll say, please, please, it's too much winning. We can't take it anymore. Mr. President, it's too much. And I'll say, no, it isn't. We have to keep winning. We have to win more. We're going to win more.
Trump gets that if you want to control our political debate, you first got to capture our values, our norms, our shared assumptions, what we feel and believe about ourselves. And of course, the battle to capture America's imagination has a long history. On race and gender, on science and religion, matters of sex and media and war and peace, all of it. There's a backstory starring somebody like Donald Trump, or maybe somebody like Miranda Priestley, somebody who, love them or hate them, went all in, often working relentlessly for years at a time, decades even, to change what Americans feel and believe about a given issue. And so far, what's the most persistent cultural conflict of the Trump era? The starkly different feelings Americans have about the world beyond our borders and about the people who come here from elsewhere. So we begin in a place where people are suddenly aware of just how much is at stake and where a whole new group of culture warriors may be joining the fight.
911. I need to report something.
This February, just weeks after the inauguration, a bartender in a Kansas City suburb made a 911 call.
He said, that he shot and killed 2 Iranian people in Olathe.
They weren't actually Iranian. Rather, 2 Indian men and 1 native-born Kansan had been shot. One man, Srinivas Kuchibhotla, was killed.
Witnesses say that the suspect shouted, quote, "Get out of my country," before shooting. The victim's widow is asking how she's supposed to comfort her grieving family.
It started as a local story, but soon enough, it became an international incident, one that not only rocked the Indian American community, but ricocheted around the world and into the Indian press.
The shooter was a 51-year-old Navy vet.
अमेरिका में भारतीय इंजीनियर की गोली मारकर हत्या
కాన్సస్ లో తెల్ల రాక్షసుడి చేతిలో ఏవియేషన్ ప్రోగ్రామ్ ఇంజనీర్ శ్రీనివాస్.
WNYC reporter Arun Venugopal watched as this shooting consumed the news cycle. And Arun, I gather you also immediately saw that this was going to be something of a turning point for the South Asian community in general.
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, I've never seen the level of alarm around the death of any single member of my community as happened in this case. I mean, the way that it reverberated throughout this country and back in India.
And I imagine it rocked you personally.
You know, it takes me back to my youth and certain incidents that happened. I was thinking about this incident in my first week of college. I lived with a guy from rural Texas, okay? He was this big, beefy white guy. And he's telling me about the Indian doctor in his small town and how smart Indians are, right? And how hardworking we are. And then he leans in and he whispers, "Not like those spics."
Whoa.
Yeah. And at that time, I'm like 17, right? And I had no idea how one had anything to do with the other, okay? Why praising my people required insulting Hispanic people.
Right.
But it didn't surprise me that he knew an Indian doctor, okay? Because if you're Indian American, you kind of get used to people saying, "Hey, you know Dr. Patel," you know, and
I do know a Dr. Patel.
I know a Dr. Patel too. I know many Dr. Patels. So, I mean, there are certainly benefits to this kind of success by association, for sure. But Indians and other South Asians, we occupy this really strange, seemingly contradictory space, okay, in the American cultural imagination. On one hand, we're perceived as smart, as successful, well-behaved. On the other hand, we are the presumed threat. Or to put it another way, when American jingoism gets stirred up, when it really goes into overdrive, it often goes looking for people who look like me. It happened in 1980. I was 7 years old during the Iran hostage crisis, and a bunch of bigger kids surrounded me on the streets and demanded to know if I was from Iran. And a backlash happened again in 2001.
I'm at a Mesa gas station near 80th Street and University. An employee was shot and killed. You can see behind me.
The first victim of a hate crime killing after 9/11 was Balbir Singh Sodhi, a Sikh man originally from India who'd saved enough money to buy a gas station in Arizona. He was outside planting flowers around the edge of the gas station when a guy came by in his pickup. The man had told his friends he was going to go out and shoot some towel heads. He shot Sodi 5 times. That was September 15th, just 4 days after the World Trade Center had fallen. 15 years later, in a suburb of Kansas City, Srinivas Kuchibhotla was the first victim of a hate crime killing after the 2016 election. His wife, Sunayana, stood before camera crews not long after the shooting.
I don't know what to say. We've read many times in newspapers of some kind of shooting happening everywhere. And we always wondered, are we doing the right thing of staying in the United States of America? But he always assured me that only good things happen to good people.
I'd never been to Kansas. I hadn't even realized there were a lot of Indians there. So I made a trip. And I found myself spending an afternoon with a couple locals at the Woodside Health and Tennis Club.
It's been a very good place to raise our family, and it's been marvelous professionally for me. It's logistically a very easy and straightforward and simplified life. We've been blessed with a number of good friends.
This is Raj Bala. He's a law professor at the University of Kansas. He's written 13 books. His wife, Kara Tan-Bala, runs the 7 Pillars Institute.
We are a think tank focused on the education, research, and promotion of financial ethics.
They're both members of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Royal Society for Asian Affairs in England. Not impressed? He also recently ran the marathon in 3 hours and 42 minutes, and she was just named one of 50 Kansans you should know. We sat outside, like civilized folk do, drinking juice as people played tennis nearby.
The main reason we came here was to raise our daughter in a healthy environment, and I wanted to run a farm. So we bought a farm, and we kept chickens and have fruit trees, and all the neighbors were very welcoming. Farmers too, people who lived in the country, and we were very happy.
Raj is half Indian, half Scottish. Kara is Malaysian Chinese. They met at Oxford, got married at the United Nations Chapel in New York, and moved to Kansas City in 2003. They pretty much epitomize what we think of as cosmopolitan, except that they live in Kansas instead of Manhattan.
This is not the Kansas that we moved to in 2003. It has changed.
One of the ways it's changed, he says, concerns its relationship with violence. The state has become more permissive when it comes to the rights of gun owners. And on July 1st, this summer, a concealed carry law goes into effect on campuses across the state.
Meaning that concealed weapons can now come into the classroom. They can even come into my office. And many of us on the faculties around the Regents institutions, including myself, didn't like that, and we still don't like that. We're worried. We never would have anticipated in 2003 the concealed carry coming on.
There's another thing. One of Raj's areas of specialty is Islamic law, Sharia law. He's written a textbook about it, and his expertise is such that he also teaches the subject to U.S. Special Ops Forces at Fort Leavenworth. He's that good. But among the general population, and especially among some conservatives, it doesn't go over too well. And people have started rumors about him, that he tries to convert his students to Islam, which is silly, not least because he's Catholic. But all these things have built up his concerns. His wife is worried too, especially after Srinivas Kuchibhotla was killed.
And so I did write to my congresswoman, my senators after the shooting, and I said, I really don't feel safe anymore for my husband. I used to feel safe. I never worried about it, but now I worry. So I got a reply back from the congresswoman defending the Second Amendment, and I never got a reply back from the senators.
Now, after years of living here, raising their daughter here, and generally thriving, they are seriously considering leaving Kansas and the country.
It just made me feel as if my voice wasn't being heard in a very conservative state, and that perhaps it was time to just take a break from the country and come back when things get get better. I know things go in cycles, so the pendulum has swung really one way, quite extreme, and we're waiting for it to swing slowly back.
When I mentioned to a mutual acquaintance that Raj was having second thoughts about staying in Kansas, he was shocked. Raj bled KU, he told me. He's that committed to the University of Kansas. But it's not just Raj, it's the students too, the ones who are graduating and now need reference letters. Over the last few years, he said, many more of them have been asking for letters for companies based outside of Kansas and outside the region in general. These are employers based for the most part on the coasts. Add to all of this the reports that the number of international students who applied to local colleges plummeted this spring, and you have what appears to be a serious problem. Now, Raj Balad thinks it's too early to say definitively, but he worries about where this is headed. Whether the state is witnessing the early signs of what he called a brain drain. Now, this is a curious term, but he knew I'd recognize it. It's the term that people in India, among other places, use to describe the thousands of doctors, engineers, and others, the best minds, if you will, who left the country because there just weren't enough opportunities at home. Which isn't to say that everyone's packing up and leaving. In the wake of the shooting, some Kansans waver between fear and a feeling that maybe they're overreacting and that this too will pass. At least this was the case with the software engineer I met, Venkat Munda.
Oh, that was pretty funny. I think it was a week or week and a half ago, one of the weekends. Basically,
I sat with Venkat in the living room of a home owned by his friend, Richard Galler, a native Kansan who's married to Pamina, originally from India. How long have you all lived here?
In this house, about 17 years, and in Kansas, about 30 years.
Oh, I was born here.
Richard and Venkat have a percussion troupe with some of their friends, and they usually practice here. And Venkat somewhat sheepishly recounted a recent incident at the local Costco.
Generally tend to go to Costco and Sam's, all these major clubs during the weekends. That's the time we are generally free. And guess what? A lot of Indians there.
I noticed that.
Right? So, a lot of Indians there. But this time, we were there and two of us, we were talking to each other. And obviously, we are in the aisle and the carts are taking up much of the space. I think what we felt was somebody pointedly looking at us and saying, "You are blocking the aisle here, move." And that was sort of new for me in the sense, we have always been pretty nice in our manners. I mean, when we go out, we actually try to look at people and say hello and, the basic norms of what I would call is the American society norm. In India, we probably not look at anyone. The norm here is you look at him, at least shake your head, nod your head, what's up, kind of thing. And I have learned to do that. And this particular Costco visit, I was scared of doing it. And I think we normally would have gone around each aisle. Every time I go there, I try to go around and try to find new products. This time, I think we were in and out pretty quickly. And we felt, there is some palpable change in how people are looking at us, but maybe how we are looking at people.
This happened soon after the shootings. Venkat was still turning over the moment when he'd become racially self-aware, and he still can't decide whether it's all in his head. He pointed out that there was a rally right after the shootings, and that a good 60% of the crowd was not Indian, which made him feel good. Not long after that, his neighbors who are white organized a get-together and called a lot of the other neighbors over. And one by one, each of the white neighbors came up to Venkat and his wife and told him how much they cared for them, that we're all in this together. But it was Richard who noted that for all the locals who are good and supportive of immigrants, there are others who've been caught off guard.
In the suburbs here, there's lots of different subdivisions all around. And when I grew up as a young boy, everybody was white. There was no blacks. Some of us were Jews, but very few. Everybody was basically Christian and white. Now you go to these subdivisions, well, like here, my next door neighbor is from Vietnam. There's all kinds of different ethnicities in the neighborhood. And in some of these subdivisions, would you say at least half or more than half are Indian families?
Yeah,
in some
not
places.
Not exactly half, but yes,
Yes.
close to half, I would say.
Yeah, and I'm thinking maybe the average white guy doesn't get it. He doesn't understand why are there so many
non-whites,
non-whites here, and why are they? Maybe he thinks maybe they're doing so well. What's happening? He doesn't get it.
And you think there's a perception or possible perception that like their success is at our expense?
Yeah.
Pamina, Richard's wife, suggested that immigrants from India have a work ethic that, for better or worse, sets them apart.
Whatever work you give it to Indians, they really work and do it. Sometimes the white people will say, no, I don't want to do it.
I don't have any factual, I don't know that as a fact. This is just hearsay.
I think the difference that I probably see, if you think about it, a regular American would use the phrase work-life balance a lot more, whereas Indian would say work is worship. They say, hey, we are here to work. Let us do the best we can. And work-life balance, who cares? So maybe that is a perception. That probably could be a problem. Yes.
Perceptions. That word keeps coming up. Up next, how Indians have been perceived throughout American history.
Here's one unmistakable trait of American political culture in the Trump era. A whole lot of people have joined the fight to shape what Americans feel and believe about ourselves and our country. And we want to know, where do you fit in all of that? Call us up and tell us, what are you willing to fight for right now? The number is 844-745-TALK. That's 844-745-8255. Leave a voicemail and don't forget to include your name. And hey, feel free to get creative with your answer. We might just share your thoughts in an upcoming episode. Here's what we've heard so far.
People organizing, coming together in communities, especially locally. I think it's pretty amazing. It's something I've never seen in my lifetime. 38 years, I've never seen this kind of local action and people putting their time, away from the workplace to get together, go to people's houses, go into the streets. It's pretty remarkable, actually.
The perception of Indians in America has changed dramatically over the years. Just over 100 years ago, a poet and playwright in California, Herman George Scheffauer, wrote an extremely influential essay about Indian immigrants in a journal called The Forum.
It is nothing more or less than a threatening inundation of Hindus over the Pacific coast.
The essay was titled A Tide of Turbans.
The American finds it difficult to accept the Hindu as a brother of the blood. Between him and this dark, mystic race lies a pit almost as profound as that which he has dug between himself and the Negro. The racial equality of the East Indian he acknowledges, but a closer affinity he unconsciously denies. The two civilizations will not mix.
This was in 1910. Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims from India, they were all lumped together as Hindus, and they were all regarded as dirty, as carriers of disease, and incapable of assimilating. All of this hostility helped the U.S. put an end to immigration from India. The so-called tide turned into a tiny trickle, and it was only in 1965, in the wake of the Civil Rights Movement, that America decided to change course. And this time, instead of loggers and farmers, the immigrants were mostly doctors and engineers, people with advanced degrees. And there are a couple reasons for this, one of which had to do with the Cold War.
The first artificial Earth satellites in the world have now been created. This first satellite was today successfully launched in the USSR.
In the 1950s into the 1960s, the Soviet Union actually had some breakthroughs.
Vijay Prashad is a historian at Trinity College and author of The Karma of Brown Folk.
It sent the first living creature into space. That was the dog Laika. Then Yuri Gagarin in 1961 orbited the Earth. These were some major breakthroughs, and it set off a panic in the United States. Like, how is it possible that the main adversary of the United States was able to have these very spectacular breakthroughs?
It was in April of 1961 that a Russian cosmonaut orbited the Earth. The very next month, President John F. Kennedy declared that the Americans would put a man on the moon.
So there was this space race competition was about prestige, but it was also about a fear that within the United States there were insufficient numbers of scientists and engineers to basically push the American space program and weapons program to the next level.
And then just a few years later, President Johnson signed Medicaid into law, as well as Medicare. This was a huge expansion of the American healthcare system, and the country simply did not have enough healthcare professionals to deliver on this promise. It's not that other countries weren't turning out doctors or nurses, but a newly independent India simply had more than most. And importantly, these were people who spoke English.
It's striking, between 1965 and about 1980, 85% of the Indians who entered the United States had advanced degrees in engineering or in applied sciences of some kind, or pure sciences, so physics, chemistry, etc. So, I mean, it's an extraordinary thing. It's unheard of in terms of migration policy that the government would allow in people of such high skills and then create this very strange community inside the United States. I mean, it was tough to be a child of that community. Everybody, all your uncles and aunts seem to have PhDs and they seem to be engineers.
In other words, a very unusual and intense form of social engineering was taking place. And at around the same time that these immigration laws were relaxed, in 1966 actually, a new term was coined, model minority. This was in a 1966 New York Times Magazine article by sociologist William Peterson about Japanese Americans, how despite decades of discrimination, they'd flourished in this country. The article employed another term, in quotation marks, problem minorities, to describe the prevailing view of African Americans, among others. Over time, this distinction between model minorities and problem minorities was magnified. The U.S. media has spent years asking variations of this.
So, those high scores beg the politically incorrect question, are Asians naturally more intelligent?
Think of all those spelling bee finals, one Indian American winner after another, on ESPN. These are the scenes that have helped define the image of Indians as special, elevated. And they fed into a broader conversation about how some groups do better than others. Conservative commentator Dinesh D'Souza was born in India before moving to the U.S. He's an outspoken opponent of affirmative action and social welfare. And he's long argued that black culture is to blame for the problems of black America.
So I focus on cultural differences. And I point out, for example, that in virtually every measure of academic achievement or economic performance, we find not just whites, but immigrants, Cubans, West Indians, Koreans, leapfrogging ahead of American blacks and claiming the fruits of the American dream. I think that this is because blacks have developed a culture that represents an adaptation to historical circumstances, but one that is today in some respects a liability or dysfunctional.
There is often in this country a racial hierarchy that's created. Races are pitted against each other.
Amardeep Singh is a human rights activist and helped form the Sikh Coalition after 9/11.
So this idea that Asians are a model minority is used to say, well, look at the Latinos and look at black people. They're not model minorities compared to Asians. Well, guess what? The only Asians that were allowed into this country for a while were the sort of most socioeconomically advanced and educationally advanced Asians from their respective home countries.
But it isn't just conservatives or the American mainstream. The Indian community itself has bought into it. And really, so is Indian popular culture. In the last 10 or 15 years, there have been lots of Bollywood movies showing Indians abroad. They're invariably well-educated, equally fluent in Hindi and English, and of course, great-looking. They're jet-setters, not bound by convention, or for that matter, by national borders. Today, they're having rice and dal with their ma in Mumbai. Tomorrow, they're in New York, Barcelona, or Melbourne, at work, or on a Mediterranean cruise, or falling in love. Recently, on Conan O'Brien, the comedian and Bollywood actor Veer Das made the case that it is a good time to be Indian in the world.
Not the best time to be brown, but if you're gonna be brown, Indian is the best brown. Think about where all the other brown people on the planet come from. Indians, we are the top of that food chain. Indians, we are the white people of brown people.
We are the white people of brown people. But Veer's not done.
Because when we get shot, there's an investigation, ladies and gentlemen.
There you have it. We are dark enough to be the targets of hate crimes, but connected enough that the powers that be actually pay attention.
Which isn't a lot of solace if you're still worried about getting racially profiled or even shot. But I guess what I'm taking from this piece, though, that there is a lot of resources still in this community that can be rallied.
Yeah. I mean, you have to remember Indian Americans have the highest household income of any ethnic group in America. And what we're seeing is that some of the wealthiest members of the community are beginning to reach out to activists, okay, the people who've been fighting the fight for a long time, because now they want to know how they can help, how they can actually influence the political system and help fund grassroots politics, and also maybe help align this community with other communities of color, like Latinos and African Americans, because they've been dealing with this for a lot longer.
But wow, I don't want to glaze over that statistic, the highest median income. And yet all of that wealth and success and advanced degrees and all of that, apparently it is not enough to remove lingering doubts from some Americans that you need to go back where you came from.
Apparently not. But I'd actually put it this way. For a long time, for centuries really, the West has convinced itself that it was superior to every other civilization, right? And that white culture was the pinnacle of all cultures. But look around. There are a lot of people, there are millions of people, white Americans, who are struggling economically, okay? And they're being ravaged by the worst drug epidemic that the country's ever seen. So in that sense, I think the success of people who are brown or who are immigrants, people who are pretty well adjusted, who are wealthy, fluent, not just in the language, but also in the ways of America, I think that's interpreted by some people as an unforgivable offense.
It can certainly be exploited by some people as an unforgivable offense. And that's interesting because it reveals a broader point about race in America. We have this idea of linear progress, that the American story is one of steady, if hard-won, progress toward a more racially just society. And Barack Obama literally embodies this idea. But historian Ibram Kenji says that's too simplistic. Kenji says, yes, the Obama narrative is true and undeniable.
But it is not the only sort of trajectory, or it's not the only historical force. There's a second historical force that we haven't been willing to acknowledge.
Kenji has exhaustively traced this second historical force over centuries of Western history.
And that historical force is racist progress. And so we've had racial progress or anti-racist progress and the simultaneous progression of racism. And what racist ideas have long done historically is racist ideas have prevented us from seeing the progression of racism.
The murder of Srinivas Kuchibhotla seems to have made some in the Indian American community aware of Kenji's point. That racism, the idea that white people in America belong at the top of some kind of racial hierarchy with all of its privileges, that has always been part of American culture. But that idea, it updates itself. Or really, someone updates it. Someone weaves a new version of it to fit into the politics of the time. Like a cerulean sweater, racist fashion adapts, ready for the next generation to put on. Today's model minority can easily become tomorrow's problem minority. Next week on the United States of Anxiety, America's long, self-defeating negotiation with science.
This is a deliberate strategy that skeptics and deniers use. If they can get the media to present skepticism as sort of equal and opposite to science and scientific evidence, then they have won.
You can and should subscribe to the United States of Anxiety Round 2, The Culture Wars. Just go to iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Brooke Gladstone.